Throughout the Cold War, the CIA ran hundreds of operations. Most failed. Some ended in disaster. But one operation exceeded all expectations: the Berlin Tunnel. For 11 months, this tunnel was like a river, flowing from the very heart of Soviet military communications. Every day, 50,000 conversations were recorded, more than 400,000 hours of recordings in total. Locations of Soviet units, military exercise plans, command chains, weapons inventories. The CIA struggled for years to analyze it all. There was so much data that some tapes remained unheard even a decade later. When the Soviets finally discovered the tunnel, they announced it as a victory. "We have exposed American espionage," they declared. But the truth was far more complicated, because this discovery was not accidental. It was planned, and the betrayal behind it was one of the greatest secrets of the Cold War. This is the story of how America dug beneath the Iron Curtain, and how a single traitor turned the greatest intelligence success into the most elaborate deception in espionage history. In 1953, the CIA faced a critical problem. The Soviet Union had stationed nearly 400,000 troops in East Germany. These forces were positioned to invade Western Europe at a moment's notice. Understanding their plans, their movements, their intentions was essential to preventing World War III. But gathering intelligence behind the Iron Curtain was nearly impossible. Human agents were constantly caught. Radio intercepts were encrypted. Aerial reconnaissance could only show troop positions, not intentions. The solution came from an unlikely success. In Vienna, British intelligence had managed to tap into Soviet communication cables running through the city. The operation, codenamed Silver, had produced valuable intelligence for years. What if they could do the same thing in Berlin? The idea seemed insane. Vienna was different. The cables there ran through areas accessible to Western agents. Berlin was divided by walls, checkpoints, and armed guards. The Soviet communication cables ran deep inside East German territory. But the prize was too valuable to ignore. 3 main communication cables connected Soviet headquarters in East Berlin to Moscow. Every order, every report, every secret message passed through these cables. Tapping them would be like reading the enemy's mail. CIA engineers studied the problem for months. The cables ran along a highway in the Alt-Glianica district, about 300 meters inside East German territory. Too far to reach from above ground, too dangerous to approach openly. The only option was to go beneath. In the summer of 1954, construction began on a small warehouse compound in the Rudow district of West Berlin. Officially, it was a radar intercept station for the United States Army Signal Corps. Unofficially, it was the entrance to the most audacious tunnel in espionage history. The engineering challenges were enormous. The tunnel would need to extend 500 meters, most of it beneath East German soil. It would need to be deep enough to avoid detection, but shallow enough to reach the cables. It would need to be perfectly straight to reach the precise location of the cables, and it would need to be completely silent. East German border guards patrolled the surface regularly. Soviet engineers occasionally inspected the cable routes. Any unusual noise, any suspicious subsidence, any hint of excavation would bring disaster. The tunnel was designed with extraordinary care. The main shaft descended 6 meters into the sandy Berlin soil. From there, a horizontal passage extended eastward, reinforced with steel segments to prevent collapse. The diameter was just under 2 meters, large enough for men to work, but small enough to minimize the excavated. The excavated soil presented its own problem. Hundreds of tons of earth had to be removed without arousing suspicion. The CIA built a large warehouse above the tunnel entrance. Trucks came and went regularly, supposedly delivering equipment for the radar station. In reality, they were hauling away the evidence of espionage. The work continued for 6 months. 3 shifts of workers dug around the clock. Progress was measured in meters per day. 18 meters in February, 22 meters in March. The tunnel crept forward beneath the death strip, beneath the watchtowers, beneath the feet of unsuspecting guards. By February 1955, the tunnel had reached its destination. American engineers carefully dug upward toward the cables. They worked with surgical precision, measuring distances with electronic sensors, listening for any sign of detection. When they finally reached the cables, they found 3 separate bundles. Each bundle contained hundreds of individual wires. The task of tapping them would take weeks of painstaking work. The cables themselves were a marvel of Soviet engineering. Thick lead sheathing protected the wires from moisture and interference. Multiple layers of insulation prevented signal leakage. The Soviets had designed them to be tamper-proof. They had not designed them to be tamper-proof against someone with unlimited time, unlimited resources, and access from below. American and British technicians worked in a specially constructed chamber at the end of the tunnel. They called it the tap room. It was equipped with air conditioning to control humidity, sophisticated amplifiers to boost the weak signals, and recording equipment that ran continuously. The process of tapping the cables was delicate beyond imagination. Each wire had to be accessed without breaking the connection. A break would alert Soviet technicians to a fault in the line. They would send repair crews. The tunnel would be discovered. The technicians used specially designed equipment to pierce the lead sheathing and attach induction coils to individual wires. These coils picked up the electrical signals, passing through the cables without making direct contact. The Soviets would see no change in signal quality. They would have no indication that every word was being copied. By May 1955, all 3 cable bundles were fully tapped. The intelligence began to flow. If you want to discover the secret technologies and untold stories of the Cold War, subscribe to our channel. We bring you new content every week. The volume of intelligence exceeded all expectations. The 3 cable bundles carried a combined total of 1,200 individual circuits. 432 of these were teletype circuits, carrying written messages. The rest were voice circuits, carrying telephone conversations. Every day, the tunnel produced approximately 50,000 feet of teletype tape and 1,200 reels of voice recordings. Teams of translators worked around the clock in Washington and London. They transcribed conversations, decoded messages, and compiled reports. Intelligence was extraordinarily valuable. The tunnel provided complete visibility into Soviet military operations in East Germany. Troop movements were tracked in real time. Military exercises were monitored as they happened. Supply shipments revealed the readiness state of different units. But the most valuable intelligence was the most mundane. Ordinary telephone conversations between Soviet officers revealed the truth about life behind the Iron Curtain. Complaints about equipment shortages, frustrations with bureaucratic incompetence, personal problems, and professional rivalries. These conversations painted a picture of an army that was far less formidable than it appeared. Equipment was often broken. Morale was frequently low. The fearsome Soviet war machine had cracks that did not show from satellite photographs. The tunnel also revealed the Soviet order of battle. Every unit in East Germany was identified. Commanders were named. Subordinate relationships were mapped. If war came, NATO would know exactly what forces they faced and who led them. Some intelligence was immediately actionable. The tunnel intercepted communications about a Soviet plan to reorganize their air defense network. This information allowed NATO to adjust its own plans accordingly. Other intelligence was strategic. The tunnel revealed that Soviet doctrine emphasized a rapid armored thrust into Western Europe. This confirmed NATO's worst fears and shaped the alliance's defensive posture for decades. The CIA estimated that the tunnel produced more useful intelligence in 11 months than all other Berlin operations combined over the previous decade. While American technicians were celebrating their success, a terrible truth remained hidden. The Soviets had known about the tunnel from the very beginning. In October 1953, before the first shovel of dirt had been moved, a meeting was held in London. Senior officers from the CIA and MI6 gathered to discuss the Berlin Tunnel project. The meeting was classified at the highest level. Only the most trusted individuals were invited. One of those individuals was George Blake. Blake was a rising star in British intelligence. Born in the Netherlands, he had served with distinction during World War II. He had been captured by the North Koreans during the Korean War and survived brutal captivity. He was considered a hero. He was also a Soviet spy. Blake had been recruited by the KGB during his captivity in Korea. He had agreed to work for Moscow out of ideological conviction. He believed that communism was the future of humanity. He believed that helping the Soviet Union was a moral duty. Within days of the London meeting, every detail of the tunnel project was on the desk of Soviet intelligence. The starting point, the ending point, the depth, the expected completion date, everything. The KGB faced a dilemma. They could warn the East Germans and have the tunnel stopped before construction began. But doing so would reveal that they had a source inside MI6. Blake was too valuable to sacrifice for a single operation. They made a calculated decision. They would allow the tunnel to be built. They would allow the tap to be installed. They would allow the Americans to intercept Soviet communications, and they would protect their agent. The Soviet response to the tunnel was a masterpiece of counterintelligence. They could not simply ignore it. That would mean allowing genuine secrets to flow to the West. But they could not shut it down immediately without exposing Blake. Instead, they implemented a sophisticated deception operation. Certain communication channels were kept clean. Messages that might reveal Blake's existence or compromise other Soviet operations were routed around the tapped cables. Sensitive discussions were held in person rather than over the telephone. But they could not sanitize everything. Too much caution would itself be suspicious. The Americans would notice if the cables suddenly carried only meaningless traffic. So the Soviets allowed genuine intelligence to flow. Troop movements, supply shipments, routine military communications, the kind of information that was valuable but not catastrophic. They also fed disinformation, false reports about troop strength, misleading discussions about operational plans, exaggerated complaints about equipment problems. The Americans thought they were seeing the truth. In many cases, they were seeing exactly what Moscow wanted them to see. The result was a hall of mirrors. Some tunnel intelligence was completely accurate. Some was deliberately false. And the Americans had no way to tell the difference. Years later, analysts would argue about how much of the tunnel intelligence was genuine. The consensus is that most of it was real. The Soviets simply could not fake 11 months of continuous communications without revealing the deception. But some percentage was certainly manipulated. The exact percentage remains classified to this day. On the night of April 21, 1956, a Soviet Signal Corps team was conducting routine maintenance on the communication cables in Alt-Glinica. They were responding to reports of degraded signal quality on certain circuits. As they dug down to inspect the cables, they found something unexpected, a vertical shaft leading downward into a tunnel. The team immediately summoned their superiors. Within hours, Soviet and East German officers were swarming the site. They traced the tunnel back to its source in West Berlin. They discovered the tap room, with its sophisticated equipment still running. The Soviets turned the discovery into a propaganda triumph. They invited journalists to tour the tunnel. They displayed the American equipment. They denounced Western aggression and espionage. American allies are tunneling beneath the peace-loving nations of the socialist world, declared the official Soviet statement. This proves the aggressive intentions of the imperialist powers. The CIA was embarrassed, but not devastated. They had always known the tunnel would eventually be discovered. 11 months of operation was more than they had hoped for. The intelligence gathered would take years to fully analyze. What the CIA did not know was that the discovery was not accidental. The Soviets had orchestrated the entire scene. They had chosen the timing carefully. Blake was about to be transferred to a new assignment. His knowledge of the tunnel would become outdated. The risk of exposing him by shutting down the tunnel was now minimal. The maintenance team had been sent to find the tunnel. The surprised reactions were rehearsed. The outrage was theatrical. The greatest intelligence success of the early Cold War had been compromised from its first moment, and the Americans would not learn the truth for another 5 years. George Blake's career continued to flourish after the tunnel affair. He was promoted. He was given new responsibilities. He was trusted with ever more sensitive information. All the while, he continued to spy for Moscow. In 1961, a Polish intelligence officer named Michael Golanewski defected to the West. He brought with him a treasure trove of information about Soviet espionage operations. Among his revelations was the existence of a high-level Soviet agent inside British intelligence. The investigation that followed was painstaking. Hundreds of officers were examined, security records were reviewed, travel patterns were analyzed. The evidence pointed to George Blake. When confronted, Blake initially denied everything. But faced with mounting proof, he eventually confessed. He admitted to working for the KGB since 1951. He admitted to betraying the Berlin Tunnel. He admitted to compromising dozens of Western agents, many of whom had been executed. Blake was sentenced to 42 years in prison, the longest sentence ever handed down by a British court. He served only 5 years before escaping from Wormwood Scrubs prison with the help of other inmates. He fled to the Soviet Union, where he lived until his death in 2020 at the age of 98. The revelation of Blake's treachery forced a complete reassessment of the tunnel intelligence. Analysts reviewed every piece of information, trying to determine what was genuine and what was Soviet disinformation. The conclusions were mixed. Much of the intelligence appeared to be valid. The Soviets had not been able to completely control what passed through the cables, but certain key assessments had likely been manipulated. The tunnel remained a success in many ways, but it was a success built on a foundation of betrayal. The Berlin Tunnel operation left a complex legacy. On one level, it was an extraordinary technical achievement. American and British engineers had constructed a sophisticated underground facility in hostile territory. They had tapped cables that the Soviets believed to be completely secure. They had operated undetected for nearly a year. The intelligence gathered was genuinely valuable. Even accounting for Soviet manipulation, the tunnel provided insights into Soviet military capabilities that could not have been obtained any other way. It shaped NATO planning for years. But the tunnel also revealed the fundamental vulnerability of intelligence operations. No secret stays secret forever. Human frailty, in the form of traitors like Blake, can compromise even the most carefully planned operations. The tunnel taught the CIA a painful lesson about compartmentalization. Too many people had known about the project. The planning meetings had included individuals who did not need to know every detail. This organizational failure had allowed Blake to betray the operation before it even began. Future operations would be structured differently. Information would be shared on a strict need-to-know basis. Even senior officers would be kept ignorant of details that did not concern their specific case responsibilities. The tunnel also demonstrated the limitations of technical intelligence. Even with access to enemy communications, understanding the enemy remained difficult. The Soviets could manipulate what they said. They could hide their true intentions behind a wall of routine traffic. Human intelligence, agents on the ground, remained essential. Machines could intercept messages. Only humans could interpret what those messages really meant. The Berlin Wall fell in 1989. Germany reunified in 1990. The Cold War ended. The tunnel itself had been destroyed by the Soviets shortly after its discovery in 1956. They had filled it with concrete to prevent any possibility of reuse. But the memory remained. In 2005, construction workers in Berlin accidentally uncovered a section of the original tunnel. The discovery made international headlines. For the first time, ordinary Germans could see physical evidence of the shadow war that had been fought beneath their feet. A small museum was established near the original site. Visitors can see remnants of the tunnel equipment. They can read about the operation and its ultimate betrayal. They can reflect on an era when the fate of the world hung on secrets passed through underground cables. The Berlin Tunnel stands as a monument to both the brilliance and the futility of espionage. Brilliant because it worked, at least for a time. Futile because the enemy knew all along. In the end, the tunnel revealed a fundamental truth about the Cold War. Both sides were watching each other. Both sides were deceiving each other. And neither side ever truly knew what the other was thinking. The Iron Curtain was never as solid as it appeared. Beneath it, in the darkness, tunnels ran in both directions.